Hey, everybody, it's Natalie Bencivenga, and welcome to another edition of Facts Over Fear. It's Friday. It's been a week. I think we're all feeling it. But there have been some things that have been happening in the news cycle that I just feel have been going under the radar a little bit. And I want to talk about why that is. Because when powerful men are accused of sexual exploitation, I think a lot of us assume accountability is sort of an elusive thing. But this recent case brought a stunning verdict. Many of you may have heard about it. We're going to talk about it a little bit right now. The Alexander brothers, once stars of the luxury real estate world, they were convicted of sex trafficking in a Manhattan federal court after prosecutors said they used their wealth and influence to prey on women. And I have to say, I was paying very close attention to this case, and maybe it's the cynic in me, but I was very surprised that justice seems to have been served. There were 11 survivors that testified, and the jury returned 19 guilty verdicts that could basically send the brothers to jail for life. Joining me now is civil rights attorney Arick Fudali, who represents survivors of the Jeffrey Epstein's trafficking network, has been at the center of calls for greater transparency around the Epstein files, and also has a connection to this case with the Alexander brothers, which I'll let you share a little bit in here in a moment. Arick, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, were you surprised what you saw transpire with this case? Let's just start in broad strokes.
Right, I don't know if surprised is the right word. I mean, yeah, maybe a bit surprised. I mean, certainly pleasantly surprised. And the reason is not because of the evidence. I mean, 11 women testified very bravely against the Alexander brothers, telling very disturbing and heart-wrenching stories. I mean, I was there for portions of the trial because I represent an accuser of the Alexander brothers in a separate civil lawsuit. So I was there observing and in support of my client. But a bit surprised that the jury really understood the nuances of sex trafficking.
Mm.
Someone who, in this on the civil arena, does a lot of sex trafficking cases where we bring cases under the TVPA, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. I know firsthand that it is not the most simple law to explain to a jury. First, also not the simple law for a jury to not just understand, but to apply to a certain set of facts. Typically, when someone, a layperson, hears sex trafficking, you think of the movie Taken, or you think of someone, kidnapped, forced against their will into the sex trade. And that's not really how sex trafficking or the TVPA is applied in the United States, and especially not how it's been expanded by the courts. So I was really sort of pleasantly surprised to see that the jury really understood it, really got it, and applied it to this set of circumstances with the allegations against the Alexander brothers, who, were convicted of sex trafficking under very different context than you would expect a sex trafficking case to go.
Can you explain a little bit, just high level, what that difference is?
I'll do my best. So the TVPA, what the TVPA outlaws, per the letter of the law, is to
Mhm.
knowingly recruit or entice an individual into a commercial sex act, knowing that you're going to use force or fraud.
Mm.
That's basically, and I'm paraphrasing a bit, but that's
Sure.
basically the letter of the law. Now, when you actually think about what that law means, it's a pretty broad, there could be a pretty broad, application of it. For instance, that thing of value, the Commercial Sex Act doesn't need to be I'm paying money for sex. I'm giving
Mm.
you money, you're giving me sex, or it doesn't mean or I'm paying whoever is, controlling you, and then you're performing sex. That's not necessarily, it's been applied in a lot of ways. For instance, in like the arts, right, or in the performing arts. So for instance, the film industry, if a producer, say, invites a young
Mhm.
actress to his hotel room and say, "Hey, I have a part for you. Why don't you come to my hotel room, do a little audition for me? Let's see if you're absolutely right for it."
Mm.
Uses that opportunity to then force sex upon that woman. That's sex trafficking. That is a violation of the TVPA. We also see it similarly in the modeling industry. Maybe a high profile fashion mogul photographer will maybe use the same tactics. That is sex trafficking. So what the prosecutors did in the Alexander's brother case is they alleged that the Alexander brothers would entice their, alleged victims with, well, victims now, they're convicted sex traffickers, their victims with, high profile parties or vacations or those sites of, those types of, currency, if you will,
Sure.
those types of opportunities. And that's how the prosecution made the connection to the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, which I thought was really creative and a really clever and smart way to bring the claims against the brothers. I hope that was easy to
Oh,
digest. It's a very complicated law, and
right.
it's constantly expanding, but that's basically in a nutshell how it was applied and how I often apply it in my civil cases.
No, I do really appreciate that because for one, when I think of sex trafficking, you think of a very specific set of
Right.
situations, like you had said. So there is a lot of nuance, and I think it's important. And I appreciate you coming on to chat with me about this because education around this topic is key, especially as we're learning
Right.
more and more about how common trafficking is and has been. So thank you for that. From a legal perspective, what made this case strong enough? Because you had mentioned, you made a note of stating that there were, the 11
Yeah.
women that testified, for them to secure convictions on so many counts. And was 5 weeks considered pretty quick in terms of how fast this trial went, or was that not really
Yeah, those are good
surprising?
questions. I'll start with the latter. Pretty quick, especially when you consider how many counts that there were
Right.
three defendants, and each of the three brothers had their own defense team, like their
Uh-huh.
own
Uh-huh.
full defense attorney team. Sometimes you see they'll all, be like one defense team. They all had their own individual teams that I'm sure worked together in some capacity. So the fact that you had, 11 accusers, 11 witnesses, so many counts, and so many defendants and defense attorneys, 5 weeks is a little bit on the shorter side, I would expect, especially
Mhm.
when you compare it to a trial, say, like the Sean Combs case, which took a lot longer, some other
Right.
very high profile cases that often take a bit longer. But when it comes to what got them the verdict, it's always hard to sort of decipher, as I haven't been able to interview any of the jurors, but I would say it was the overwhelming facts. Sometimes it's the law, sometimes it's the facts, sometimes it's the defendant. In this case, it was the facts and it was the allegations. Bringing in 11 consecutive women who all accuse these Alexander brothers of not just heinous crimes, but very similar heinous.
Um,
I think that's really what it was. That I think the prosecution was really able to establish an MO and a modus operandi, like really able to make the jury understand what they allege that the brother's sex trafficking scheme was, and really had the evidence and the witnesses and the really eloquent and brave witnesses to back it up. I mean, these witnesses, again, it is very difficult to testify in any courtroom. It is especially difficult in a federal courthouse, which has that sort of grand opulence, but of
yeah.
course, compared to many state courthouses, it has that level of prestige and honor. You have a judge sitting up high on the bench. And then, of course, you have rows and rows of defense attorneys who are all waiting their
Mm,
turn to sort of pick you apart, to cross-examine. It's a really, really, and also their alleged abuser sitting right there
yeah.
staring them in the face. So, and a jury who's deciding if they believe them or not. I mean, it's a really difficult thing for a victim or a witness to do in a criminal case. So I really commend those women who were brave enough to come forward and tell their story. And I think it was those women. I don't think I'm fairly confident that it was the testimony of those women that secured this conviction for the prosecution.
That's what I was thinking too. I mean, it seemed extremely significant to have that many women testify, and like you said, with similar stories. When we're looking at what the prosecution did here and how they argued that the brothers used their wealth, their perceived status to lure these victims, is that a common way? Is that a common dynamic in trafficking cases? Because you were chatting a little bit at the top of the show how what we think of trafficking isn't always what
Right.
trafficking really is.
Absolutely, and that's sort of a very large part of my career is
Mhm.
bringing these types of lawsuits against powerful men who use their power and they use their wealth and they use their resources to commit, sexual exploitation, sex trafficking, or other sex crimes. It is unfortunately very common, and I think not necessarily. It's typically common, I think, when you have any industry where there's a gross power imbalance.
Yeah.
I referenced the film industry, the music industry, the modeling industry. These are industries where there are some power brokers at the top, and then I don't want to say desperate, but very, ambitious, young, influential people at the bottom who have put their hopes and their dreams and everything they've ever done their whole lives into this career. And those power brokers are the ones that decide if they make it or not. So when you have that extreme balance of imbalance of power, unfortunately, you see very often that power exploited, for sexual exploitation, sex trafficking. So, and it's really any industry.
Huh.
Now, when it comes to this criminal trial that just happened, the Alexander brothers, this is a little different because this wasn't really an industry power imbalance type thing. This is really more wealth. And that's something you also see when, unfortunately, with wealth and power and resources, sometimes you see an exploitative use of that power and wealth. And I've sort of based my career
Yeah.
on trying to stop that, or at the very least, hold those who use their power and wealth for sexual exploitation accountable.
When we're looking at this case, it was also noted that the brothers appeared as well in the Epstein files. Was there any connection there, or was this just a coincidental thing?
Yeah, I don't know. I did read, of course, and I read the reports about them being mentioned in the
Sure.
Epstein files. There's a lot of people mentioned in the Epstein files. It's
Fair.
difficult to parse through whether there's any real connection. Of course, these brothers were in the real estate market, so it's not surprising to
Uh-huh.
me that at some point their names, these were very high profile, very successful luxury real estate agents.
Huh.
So I'm not surprised that their names would have ended up there. Whether there's anything to that, I don't know at this point. But certainly interesting to see their names in the Epstein files, and we continue to learn more and more about those Epstein
Yeah.
files.
And we're going to talk about that in a minute here. Yeah, of course, I did a double take because I was like, let me double check that a few times before I bring that into focus. But it is interesting. And when we're looking at this from the broader lens, before we shift gears here a little bit, do you think that this verdict is sending a message that maybe, we talked about Time's Up a few years back in the Me Too movement, but is this really becoming a space where time seems to be up now for these types of convictions that we're going to perhaps see a tide turning, that people are starting to believe women or believe survivors in general? Or do you think this was sort of a unicorn?
I really certainly hope so now. I mean,
Yeah.
that's sort of my hope. But even beyond, I mean, yes, that one step, yes, maybe we get back to that Me Too era, theme of or movement, or push to believe women, or at least, believe them, investigate,
Right.
hold these men accountable. Um, but beyond that, I also hope this is a sort of a broader message, especially when you juxtapose it with how the Epstein case has been handled. The lesson from the Jeffrey Epstein fiasco, for lack of a better word, perhaps that's the right word, but the lesson from that has been that there are two tiers of justice in the United States. Perhaps there's three, the friends with Donald Trump being, the third tier of justice here,
Hmm.
right? I mean, everyone seems to have gotten away with it. Jeffrey Epstein was slapped on the wrist in 2008. It emboldened him. He continued to abuse. He's arrested and finally, very, very suspiciously allowed to kill himself in jail.
Hmm.
Ghislaine Maxwell is the one person in the entire world who's ever been actually had any justice, and she's sitting playing with puppies in a minimum security resort. The Department of Justice continues to cover up the other wealthy, powerful names in the in the Epstein files. There continues to be redaction. There continues to be a very concerted effort to cover up these names and these individuals. So the lesson there has been like, if you are rich and powerful in America, you can get away with everything. I mean, that's been the message, and it's been so disheartening for me, who you know who makes a career on representing the little guy
Sure.
here. So this different sort of side of it,
Hmm.
this verdict against the Alexander brothers, who should not be understated, were very wealthy, very
Yeah.
powerful, very influential young men in Manhattan, in Miami. For them to actually see true criminal justice here, have full, very robust teams of defenders, very talented defense attorneys. One of the attorneys who represented brothers is the same who got the great acquittals for Sean Combs. So one of the same attorneys. So really strong defense teams to put all the money and resources into that, to have this sort of aura of untouchability,
Mm.
for them to be held accountable, to be convicted on every single count in claims that were not that easy to prove when it comes to the TVA, as I explained earlier. I hope that this message is stronger than the one that we've got from the Epstein case, that accountability is possible, justice is possible. And I hope this encourages women or anyone who is suffering in silence to come forward, no matter how wealthy and powerful their abuser might be, and to take those steps. Don't look at the Epstein fiasco as the model. Look at the Alexander brothers conviction as the
Yeah.
model of what can happen.
Well, I appreciate that, because the reason I wanted to bring you on originally, when I DM'd you, I was like, "Hey, Arick, by the way, this is wild that they're getting a conviction. And yet here we are with
Yeah.
the Epstein files. And it's like crickets, or at least it feels that way, I think, right now publicly, especially because we've had, let's say, a lot of distracting news going on and coming out of the Trump regime, which I believe a lot of that is very intentional in order to remove attention from what is going on with Epstein. But I think we need to continue to press from a media perspective and talk about this. So I'm grateful that you're here. I wanted to talk a little bit about something that has been developing that I saw on CNN. It seemed to disappear. Epstein tapes. And I say that because I went to research this today earlier. I could hardly find anything online except the video that I had saved to my Instagram account from CNN, which I think speaks volumes in and of itself. I just want to quickly give you some context.
Please.
CNN discovered several unredacted videos of young women among the millions of files related to the Jeffrey Epstein case released by the Justice Department. There was one woman as young as or girl as young as 15 years old. From a legal standpoint, first of all, how serious is this that their faces were out there, that these videos were out there for a moment? They've since been taken down. Uh, what have you heard about this as it relates to what you're allowed to share about what you're working on?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly compelling news, and it's jarring that these videos exist and they were put out there and that faces were released. I mean, that's not shocking to me. I think I told you last time that one of my clients, victims of Jeffrey Epstein, was named 500 times unredacted in the 3 million,
Mm.
documents. So not shocking that they would make, that quote, mistake, if you will. It's really wild. I've been investigating, and I was reminded because I looked at my own name in the Epstein files, and there's legal correspondence for me going back there from, I think, 2015. So, I've been investigating Jeffrey Epstein and, pursuing him since 2015. I've only been a lawyer since 2010. So like a third of my career, more than a third of my career, I've been pursuing Jeffrey Epstein. And, I'm still learning things, and that's what's so shocking. And I think that goes to show a couple things. A, how powerful he was to keep this so under wraps. How sort of, I hate to use, positive adjectives, but how brilliantly he sort of
Mhm.
kept his sex trafficking scheme going for
Yeah.
so long, even after he got caught in 2008. He didn't stop. It didn't deter him. He ramped it up after that. And how well his evidence and this cover up has been handled. I mean, we are still seeing, we keep thinking we see, oh, well, we can't get any worse of this. Now we're seeing this, we're seeing this. Then every day it's like, oh, the government's withholding this, the government's withholding that. There's a 380 pages of just full redactions that no one will comment on what that is or what the context is. I mean, we're just constantly learning how large this web was, and how deep it really went with his facilitators and his enablers, and how far this Department of Justice seems to continue to go to keep these things covered up, and how inept they are, even when it looks like they're pretending to try to have some sort of accountability or some sort of exposure. They keep doing it incorrectly, redacting the wrong things, and it's just, I mean, if it would be funny if it wasn't so
Yeah.
tragic, what a disaster this has been for the Department of Justice.
Well, I wanted to ask you too, from a legal perspective, when you're looking at a case like the Epstein situation, which is, huge, like you said, it's a behemoth. And then there's these video clips now. And of course, there's not context for them. And from what I saw, it was hard to understand what these young girls were doing or not doing. But there's been pictures that definitely raise eyebrows, that raise serious concerns and questions about safety and what was happening. Do those pieces of evidence really help at all? Like, is it that much more useful for people to see as opposed to read emails? Because some of these emails, Arick, were incredibly graphic and horrifying. But in the larger scheme of things, why is it that's not always enough and then you see, like, we have this juxtaposition of 11 women
Yeah.
coming forward, because we've had women coming forward for years with Epstein as well. What does it take, I guess, is the
Right. I
question.
mean, it's a difficult question to
Sure.
answer. A question, a difficult one to answer. I mean, we want, and I say we, myself, and the survivors who I represent, the ones I spoke to, want full exposure.
Yeah.
We want everything out there. We don't want them withholding anything under any basis, under any privilege, other than the identities of the victims. That is it. That is the sole exception. So whether it is videos, whether it is photographs, whether it is audio recordings or emails or weird birthday cards or, whatever it is, or
Uh-huh.
we want it out there. And what we can then do with it, it still remains to be seen.
Sure.
Remain to be seen. I have a team, working almost round the clock, looking
Mm.
into all these documents, looking into potential new claims, new enablers, new places to bring, so, to get accountability and justice. And we're constantly evaluating and reevaluating as more and more information comes to light. So we want everything out there, both so the public can see what a monster Jeffrey Epstein truly was, of course, so the public and the can see who enabled, who facilitated, who perhaps even co-fused with him, but also as potential evidence as we continue to look forward and push forward to continue to get our clients the accountability and the justice they deserve.
I appreciate you so much. As we wrap this up, I just have a couple of questions I want to get your thoughts on. Do discoveries like this, these CNN releasing these tapes, increase the pressure on the Justice Department to release more information around the Epstein network, or are they going to become even more discerning and concerned about what they are able to release? How does that translate into what you just said, getting the information that you need in order to build a case?
I think it's a bit of both, but I can tell you my experience, especially over the last, say, 6 months or so, that real thing that puts pressure on the Department of Justice to continue to be quote unquote transparent is the voices of the victims, the voices of the survivors, the voices of people like yourself, independent journalists who are continuing to raise their voices, lift their voices when the media is distracted by what's going on in Iran or whatever else Trump comes up with. So it's really important that the public, the media, we continue to not let this story die. There has been a concerted effort for a long time by this administration and perhaps others to get this story to die, to put this
Mhm.
story to bed, to put this, to say this Epstein story is over, let's move on. And it's the survivors themselves who have created this almost grassroots movement of support from the public, from lawmakers, from Congress, from very high, for getting splinters in the MAGA movement. I mean, they've really created a really big, like a force to be reckoned with of pressure to have real accountability. We wouldn't be where we are today if it wasn't for the bravery and sort of the empowerment of those survivors. So, yes, CNN finding documents, journalists finding documents, bringing them to light, finding other evidence is great. But really, it's continuing to not let this story die, continuing to pressure the lawmakers, pressure the administration, pressure the Department of Justice, lift the voice of the survivors and let them know that this story is not going to go away no matter what they do, no matter how hard they try to distract, no matter who we bomb. This is not going away. And we're going to continue to fight until every single measure of exposure, accountability, justice, and closure has been satisfied.
Arick Fudali, thank you so much for joining me for Facts Over Fear. I appreciate you just responding when I reach out. It means so much to me. And thank you for sharing so much knowledge with my audience. I so appreciate you. I'll definitely continue to stay in touch if that's okay,
Please.
because as things continue to grow and evolve, I definitely would love some more updates. And I appreciate all of the work that you do.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to be on with you and keep doing what you do. Keep lifting up the voices of the survivors. And I appreciate you. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all of you for joining us. And as always, until next time, please take care of yourselves and each other. Thanks, Arick.